a seat. We're going to try to be cognizant of your time and keep everything on a timely manner this evening. And so we say 5:30, and we want to go ahead and get started on time. Again, good evening. On behalf of the Rocky Mountain City Council and the commissioners of Edgecombe and Nash counties, I'd like to welcome you to the Imperial Center and thank you for being with us as we begin our community visioning and planning process. This is a process that really started out with just a conversation between a couple of businessmen in the community, a couple of commissioners from Nash and Edgecombe County, myself, and a couple of council members that met 3 or 4 times and talked about some issues. A lot of this came out of maybe the Forbes article that ran a couple of years ago talking about the poverty in our area, and it was maybe a signal to us that we needed to do something different than we had been doing in the past. And so these conversations went on for a couple of months, but at some point in time you can't keep talking. You got to do something about it. And so we at that time asked Dr. Johnson to come down from Chapel Hill. Many of you know Dr. Johnson. He's a well-respected professor at UNC Chapel Hill. And he spent about an hour with us going over some things that we talked about in our community and recommended that the first thing that we needed to do was an assessment of our Twin County area. And many of you that have not seen his competitive study that he did was really the impetus for where we are tonight. His study ended up identifying some great assets and strengths that we've had in our community. But on the other hand, it recognized that we have some weaknesses that if we don't work on those weaknesses, then in 5 and 10 years to come, we're not going to be where we need to be as a community or as a city, and certainly both Nash and Edgecombe counties. So recognizing that this report was done and identified those things, one of the major recommendations that he made was that we do a Twin County visioning and strategic planning process, which is where we are tonight. And this is not something that we can do with just elected officials. This is something that we have to do with the community's input, the buy-in by the community, because there are people that live in maybe eastern Edgecombe County that feel closer to Greenville than they do to Tarboro or Rocky Mount. And the same thing on western Nash County. There are people that may feel closer to Wilson and Wake County than they do to Nashville or Rocky Mount. But these are all people that live in this community. They live in this Twin County area, and it needs to be inclusive. So the process we're embarking on tonight is an inclusive process that we want everybody to be a part of. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I know this is a busy time of the year, and we thank you for your time. We've had some great public-private partnerships in Rocky Mount. A great one is sitting across the street. The Brownsville Memorial Library was a public-private partnership. Still is funded by the counties and the city of Rocky Mount. Caroline's Gateway, I see John Guessman up there, is a great example of how we cooperate with a public-private partnership in both Edgecombe, Nash, and the city of Rocky Mount, as well as the private sector, are still involved in Caroline's Gateway. But we really are on a historic occasion tonight because of our governmental entities and the citizens that are joining together to chart a course for the future of this region. We recognize that when we work together regionally, we are a stronger force and can impact change in a positive way for all of our citizens. It's our desire to improve the quality of life for all of our citizens, to encourage the entrepreneurial spirit, which has been the backbone of our community's history, and to develop a strong workforce to encourage new industries to locate in our area. We also want to continue to enhance our educational systems, including the Nash Rocky Mount School System, the Edgecombe County School System, Nash and Edgecombe Community Colleges, and in North Carolina Western, and I know I have representatives from all those organizations here tonight. We are grateful that you're here and that you've chosen this time to spend with us. At this time, I'd like to recognize our elected officials. First, I'd like the county commissioners from Nash and Edgecombe, as well as the Rocky Mount City Council members that are with us. If you will stand, or I see Robbie up there, stand at this time so you can be recognized. And I would make a point of saying that without their help, without their support, without their financial decision to move forward on this would not be happening tonight. I'd also like to ask if there are any elected officials from these following communities and ask you to stand. and I see out there Tarboro. I know there's some elected officials here. Canita, Whitakers, Leggett, Middlesex, Bailey, Spring Hope, Red Oak, and Nashville. In addition, because we've already mentioned education, I'd like to recognize any representatives of the Edgecombe County or Nash County Rocky Mount School Boards. If you're here, you would stand. So, thank you for being here. I'd also like to take this opportunity to express our thanks to the Rocky Mount Community Foundation for their financial support of our effort to create a common vision and strategic plan for this region. I'd ask you to help me now to show our appreciation for the Community Foundation as they've made a significant contribution toward this effort with a $25,000 grant for the visioning process. So let's thank them. And we've got a number of organizations that are helping sponsor tonight's event. I'd like to recognize them. I'd like to recognize the North Carolina Association of Community Development Associations, the Rocky Mount Area Chamber of Commerce, the Electric Cities of North Carolina, Power Secure, and Texacan for their sponsorship. All of these organizations are helping fund tonight's program, and please help me in expressing our thanks to these sponsors. Again, I know it's a busy time of the year. We are very excited about this process and that you're here tonight to be involved in charting a course for the future of the Twin County region and the Rocky Mount Metropolitan Statistical Area, which encompasses both Nash and Edgecombe counties. At this time, I'd like to call on the chairman of the Edgecombe County Commissioners and Nash County Commissioners, Leonard Wiggins and Billy Morgan, to see if either one of you have any remarks tonight. And I don't see Leonard, or I know he's here somewhere, and I know Billy's here. So if any of you have any remarks, we'd love for you to come up or stand right where you are.
Mr. Mayor, I think you covered it all. I just said on behalf of the commission, we are very, on the Edgecombe County Commission, we are very pleased to participate in this project, and it's exciting to see so many community people involved. We're just hoping that something comes out of this committee that all of the governing boards can support. And thank all of you for coming.
Thank you. I don't know if Mr. Morgan's here or anybody from the Nash County Commissioners would like to make a comment, but we'd certainly love for you to do it at this time.
I just think that we need to move forward. This is something that is needed. I was listening to C-SPAN last week, and former representative from Rocky Mount said that east of Raleigh, we're just like a third world nation. We're undeveloped. And so we need to move on and forward and get this moving, because I believe something great is going to come out of this. That's why I support it wholeheartedly.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, at this time, I'd like to call on Reverend Howard Kendrick to do the invocation, after which we will hear from City Manager Charles Finney to provide us with a background of how we got to where we are today and our next steps forward. Reverend.
As I had the honor to be invited to this meeting today, I ran home and changed clothes, and I put on my coat. I hadn't worn for a year. And I found out that my body has greatly prospered over my clothes. And I think the Lord used that. I've been praying. He used that to show me that in spite of a lot of hardships that have gone on, we've still managed as a community to prosper. We prospered spiritually. God has poured His Spirit out upon us and has blessed us. And instead of saying fat or full, I think we're overabundant. We have an overflowing. We have an overflowing of spirituality. We have an overflowing of exceptional folks in our area. If you just look around, every one of you know exceptional people. We have an overflowing of abounding friendliness. This is a great area to live, a great area to be, no matter what county you're from. and we have a dynamic, overflowing future. And that's what we're coming about. We have a Lord who has supplied greatly. Let's go to him today. Heavenly Father, we just thank you right now as we can look around us. And the world is crazy. Things are crazy around us. But even in our communities here, we have had a supply of your love and your spirit and your nature and your ability. You've given us great leaders. You've given us great vision. You've given us great future. We thank you that we can come together in this meeting today to let your presence rule. We thank you for your presence in this place. We would ask that you would take charge and lead us and guide us into the fullness and the dynamic that you have for our area right here. You have told us time and time again that this is a place that the world is going to see. And we praise you for that right now in the preciousness of our Lord and Savior. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Kendrick. Good evening. Good evening. Nothing makes me happier than to see this crowd here this evening as we take on an awesome task of creating our future. Peter Drucker says the best way to predict the future is to create. Tonight, we are kicking off the process of creating the future for Nash, Edgecombe County, Rocky Mount, the Rocky Mount MSA. We are so happy that you're here. I'm not going to do a lot of going over the study that Dr. Johnson did. Everyone has had 7 to 8 months to spend time in going through that study and the recommendations. I think it's more important tonight that we talk about the players that are going to participate in the process and to hear from our keynote speaker this evening. I will just point out one thing that Dr. Johnson pointed out. There were a number of things that he talked about we need to do. Talked about education. We need to build up our school systems, our community colleges. And when we say that, and my wife is a teacher, and I think it's very easy to start bashing teachers, I don't think that's what Dr. Johnson was talking about. He was talking about making sure that our teachers have the resources that they need to provide the education, the strong education for our children. The school system is important to attracting industries and citizens to live in our community. When people have children, they want to make sure that they're going to get a good education. And when you look around at the school systems that have tremendous growth, whether it's real or perceived, that is the reason Wake County gains about 8,000 students a year because of the reputation that their school system has. So we have a good school system, but our goal is to push it further so that people will want to live in our community. The other thing that Dr. Johnson talked about was developing an all-stakeholder inclusive Twin County region, vision, mission, and set of core values. This process is a part of that process. He also talked about a brain drain that we have in our community. Between the ages of 25 and 45, those folks are seeking greener pastures. And we need to figure out how to make those pastures green right here in the Twin County area. We have some significant challenges, but also know that we have the intellectual power collectively to bring some answers and then to implement the changes that we need to make in our community. Our city council and the Nash and Edgecombe County commissioners have identified the steering committee, and I'm calling it the steering committee, and they're calling it something different. It's a coalition of leadership team, and we'll get to that, but let me just call the names out so you know who they are. We have Donald Boswell, Robert Beeman, Sue Perry Cole, Barbara Parker, Bobby Martin, Chet Mottershead, Deborah Lamb, Ernest Taylor, Gwendolyn Pitt, Henry Barnes, James Austin, James Gray, Jeffrey Batts, Jerry Sproul, Johnny Bass, Joseph Powell, Joyce Dickens, Luther Harvey Lewis, Mike Hancock, Patsy McGee, Quinzella Bunn, Randy Dykeman, Randy Evans III. Would you please stand up and be recognized this evening? And then, as the mayor mentioned, we had to decide how we were going to do this process, because easily some people could say, well, staff could do it. However, priorities change, so the county commissioners and the city council felt it was important enough to select the firm that would lead us through the process. And that core team interviewed the group and made a recommendation to the elected officials. And the group that will lead us through the process will be Skio Solutions. And I would ask that Mike Hancock, Mike Lipcock, please stand and be recognized. And we have one young lady giving a name. Sarah. I think Sarah is out front. Would y'all please recognize them as well? Our challenge, community, is when you look at our numbers, and these would be the only statistics that I would give you. When you look at our community and you look at the numbers, a couple of numbers stick out. The census. In 2010, at the end of 10 years, when you looked at our community, Nash County had grown by about 8%. The city limits of Rocky Mount had grown by about just less than 3%. Edgecombe County had grown less than 1% in population. And when we look around at our sister cities, and these are numbers, I didn't make these numbers up. Our sister cities, who we love dearly, but we also compete with, Wilson grew by almost 11%. Greenville grew by 40% in 10 years. So we've got some work to do. But when you look at Dr. Johnson's study, the study talked about a lot of positives, so we have a lot of assets. Our chore is to take advantage of those assets. One thing that no one can pay for is our location. We sit on I-95 and US 64. Greenville would kill for that, just like we kill for a med school. Because, and nothing bad about Greenville, but you have to be going to Greenville to go to Greenville. You look around and you just end up in Rocky Mount. If you're going to New York from Miami, you end up in Rocky Mount. If you're going to the Outer Banks from Raleigh, you end up in Rocky Mount, or vice versa. We've got to take advantage of those assets. This is our opportunity. The best way to predict the future is to create it. It's our time to create the future. At this time, I'd like to call on Mike Hancock to talk about how you can be involved in that process. Mike.
Thank you. Good evening. First of all, on behalf of our team, I'd like to say how appreciative we are of the opportunity to work with all of you. We've been very excited about this project for a long time because it's rare to a community, particularly this size, where the leadership recognizes the need for this type of process and acts upon it. And over the last couple of days, we've had a great opportunity to meet with all the members of the steering committee, and I think we're even more excited now about the project than we were at the start. Those folks show a real energy, a real thoughtfulness, and a real commitment, I think, to working together for the future of this community, and that's really exciting to us. It's a great opportunity for us to work with all of you. My job is to very briefly talk to you about the process moving forward and how you can be engaged. There was a handout that you might have received out front. It gives a brief overview of the process going forward. We will be meeting with the steering committee in January to finalize the process and work out some of the details. But a core component of this process is, as Mr. Penny suggested, the effort is designed to reach out to the entire community, to reach every corner of the two counties, to reach all the different subsections of the community, the business community, the residents, the education community. And we're going to do that through a process called study circles. So in addition, out front, there was a card that you all received. And what we're asking is for folks who are interested, who would like to participate in study circles, the idea behind the study circles is we would get small groups of 8 to 12 community members together to talk about your concerns, your ideas for the future, your vision for what this community can be. And through a process of having a bunch of those study circles and synthesizing that information, really try to pull together a vision for the community's future that is the entire community's vision. So if you'd like to participate in that process, we'd like you to fill out the card. In addition, as part of this process, what we're hoping to do is build the capacity within the community to be working together on these issues for a very long time to come. I think as Mr. Holliday his presentation will point out, some of the challenges that we're facing are not challenges just for this year or next year, but for a long time into the future in terms of determining our economic future. So part of the process, we're going to train local folks to be facilitators of those groups. So if you're interested in maybe leading one of those groups, getting some training in how to facilitate the conversations around those issues, there's another box on this this postcard, that you can check to say that you're interested in doing that. We'll be collecting all of these. I think that there's some collection points around the room and out the front desk. Or there's an opportunity if you want to just fill it out later and mail it. You can put a stamp on it and drop it in the mail. After we meet in January, part of the meeting in January with the steering committee will be about how we do the broadest outreach possible. So in addition to the people who are in this room, how do we reach every segment of this community and try to invite them to the process? So I'm going to turn this over right now, but we're very much looking forward to working with you. We hope you'll fill out these cards. If you don't get a chance to do it now, please do it afterwards and send it in. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. I'm not a minister, but if you want to be involved, you need to fill out the card. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to fill the card out tonight and leave it in the box. I don't want to chance the mail, because you know the mail might get crossed. So if you could just leave it in the box before you leave tonight, we'd appreciate it. So my preacher would say, put it in the box. Can you say, put it in the box? Put it in the box before you leave tonight. Okay? But we want it in the box tonight. Thank you. You are indeed in store for a treat this evening. The City Council, since I became manager, offered me the opportunity to participate in economic development school at the School of Government in July. And the very first speaker in that class was Mr. J. Mack Holliday. And after hearing Mr. Holliday talk about economic development and the pieces that you need to have, I was convinced that this was the person that we needed to help kick off our visioning and strategic planning process for the Twin County region. J. Mack Holliday is the founder and CEO of Market Street Services Incorporated. Mr. Holliday has been in the community and economic development field since 1972. He served 3 state-level chambers of commerce over a 13-year period as Chief Operating Officer for the Governor's Development Council of Georgia, 1993 to 1997, and State Director for both the Mississippi Department of Economic and Community Development from 1988 to 1992, and the South Carolina Development Board from 1985 to 1988. Mr. Holliday has also worked with and led several local chambers, including the Memphis Area Chamber of Commerce in Tennessee, the Columbus Area Chamber of Commerce in Indiana, and the Charleston Trident Chamber of Commerce in South Carolina. Mac, I was just going to tell you, Consolidated Diesel home offices in Columbus. So there's a connection there between Rocky Mount and Columbus. Mr. Holliday now serves on the board of the Alliance for Regional Stewardship, the Southern Growth Policy Boards Council on the Southern Community, the boards of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the Atlanta Educational Telecommunications Collaborative, and the Atlanta Regional Civic League, the National Advisory Board for the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation at the University of Mississippi, the Advisory Board of Washington and Lee Alumni College, and the Editorial Board of the Journal of Multi-State Taxation and Incentives. Mr. Holliday speaks across the country on the topics of community and economic development and has been quoted in a wide variety of publications including Business Week, Fortune, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and many other newspapers. He's a graduate of Washington and Lee University, an honorary recipient of a doctorate in business administration from Johnson & Wales University, and a former U.S. Navy aviator. Holliday has been named the outstanding faculty presenter at the Basic Economic Development courses at 8 universities. He was named a certified chamber executive in 1982 and has served as both president of both the Indiana and South Carolina Chamber of Commerce executives. Mr. Holliday is married to the former Carolyn Gordon Howe and has 2 daughters, Jennifer and Sarah, 2 stepchildren, Sarah and Alec, and 3 grandchildren. Please let's give a warm Twin County welcome to Mr. J. Mack Holliday.
Charles, thank you very much. First of all, as you might imagine, when you sit there and listen to all that, it's a bit amazing. When my mother was still alive, she used to say, I'm not sure what the boy does, but I think he's a migrant worker. That's basically what I've been. Let me tell you, too, that Charles graduated from the Basic Economic Development course, so he won't have to go back next year. Let me tell you, too, that my 2 grandfathers, one was a 6'5" country lawyer from Dresden, Tennessee, named Landon Erie Holliday. They called him Lake Erie for short. The other was a circuit-riding Methodist preacher named Elmer Finch McDaniel. That is who I'm named after. So, in fact, what you see is what you get. I only know how to do this one way, and that is, in fact, what I'm going to do. Thank you for inviting me to this celebration, to your family meeting, to this wonderful facility, which is a great example of what's possible. When people have a vision, when people see something that's not there, when they see something that once was one thing but tomorrow may be another. I suggest that's what this entire process is really all about. It is like jumping on a moving train, in fact, because you have done a lot of good work in these 2 counties. There is obviously so much more to do. But I appreciate and thank you for all the work that you've already done, even as you start this process. Before I get into the core of what I want to talk about, I want to tell you 2 stories. The first one is about the longest serving justice in the U.S. Supreme Court history, Oliver Wendell Holmes. A man who served and wrote many treatises, and a bit later I'll talk more about some of his great one-liners. But the fact is that Justice Holmes lived well into his 90s. There's a great story about one day when he was in his 80s, he went and got on the train. The Reverend will forgive me for a little bit of this story. When he got about 15 minutes out of the station, the conductor came to the door and said, "Mr. Justice, can I see your ticket, please?" The Justice kind of went through his pockets and couldn't find the ticket. The conductor said, "Mr. Justice, can I see your ticket?" The Justice got out his wallet. He went all through his wallet. He couldn't find the ticket. The conductor knew who he was and said, "Mr. Justice, just forget about the ticket." He said, "No, sir, I'm going to find the ticket." He got out his daytimer. He went all through his daytimer. He still couldn't find the ticket. The conductor is frantic. "Mr. Justice, please, forget about the ticket." The Justice said, "No, I'm going to find the ticket." The conductor is now absolutely frantic. "Mr. Justice, please, just forget about the ticket." The Justice turned down his pants pockets. He still couldn't find the ticket. The conductor said one more time, "Please, Mr. Justice, just forget about the ticket." The Justice looked up from his seat over his hat glass and said, "Young man, You don't understand the problem. I don't know where the hell to get off this train. This story is about choice. Get on the train, get off the train, get run over by the train. The train in my life is the economy. It is what I have worked on. In all these places, in all the communities that our company has served in 30 states, over 140 of them, in working with them about this future. The other story is about one of my children. I'll tell you a bit more about her in a minute. Her name is Sarah. When she was 7 years old, I had just taken the job as the head of the South Carolina Development Board. We lived in Charleston, South Carolina, where I've been the chamber executive for a number of years. We were at the Citadel at a football game. She was sitting on my lap, as she often did then, and she looked up at me midway through the first quarter and said, "Dad, you've got a lot of gray hairs." I really didn't need a report on my failing physical condition from my 7-year-old. So I launched into this explanation about stress and travel and changing jobs and working 80 hours that week and everything I could think of. And she thought about it, looked at the game, and then looked back at me and said, "It's okay, because you're old." That same child asked me later that week as we walked down King Street if they had cars when I was growing up. I did tell her about my first television program, which was a terrible mistake. The story is about perception. I will always be old to Sarah. Everyone has a perception of this place. They don't know anything about it. They have a perception of North Carolina, of these two counties, of this community. But in the economic development world, perception is reality. You have to work every day to improve and change it. Remember, I was the state director for economic development in Mississippi. I know about perception. I know how hard it is to change it. So you have to fight with it and understand it, that it's not about who you were, it's about who you can be and about what you can be. This evening I want to talk to you about this world of community and economic development, about where we are economically and about where we might go and what this process can mean to you. This is a profession. One of the people I most respect in this business told me a long time ago, "Holiday, don't you ever forget that there can be no economic development without community development." And that is right. It is about place, whether it's a large city or a small one or a rural community. I want to say, too, that I am a practitioner, not a theorist. I understand what it takes and how people change. Economic development is many things to many people. But the fact is that as we look at the definition, it's about people, and we should never forget that. It is about a better place. I will tell you that, in fact, it's important to remember that it's a process. I worked for 4 different governors as the state director. I've been to more ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings than anyone should have to suffer through. But the fact is, those events are not very important. What's important is the process of how that happens. Whether it's an entrepreneur starting a one-person company, an existing business that expands, or someone that you might bring here, it's about understanding the process of how that happens and how people make those choices. It is very much where public policy and free enterprise intersect. You can make a difference in the way that these counties operate, the communities and cities operate, and how people feel welcome in working together as you really must. And it is very much about economic diversity. Because as we have learned, even when we do things well and do them right, sometimes we get hammered. And in fact, that's one of the truths that we see today. This is a profession. It is hard work. It is ever-changing. It does challenge the status quo every day because it's about change. When I talk to my chamber executive friends, sometimes when I say that, they get a bit concerned, but let me explain to you why I say it. The one thing we know is that there is one enemy in this work, and it is the status quo. Because if nothing changes, it can't get better. There can't be more opportunity for your children and their children. So in fact, you have no choice. We know that change is with us always. So the question is, what kind of change, and who will own the change? Who plays in this partnership? Who's involved in economic development? I suggest to you, at a very minimum, all of these organizations, it has to be viewed as a team sport. You can't go forward separately. You can't go forward without the public and private sectors working together. You can't go forward without everybody being involved. And that's one of the values of this kind of process, is it listens patiently and it involves civic dialogue, which we have far too little of today. It involves making difficult decisions, making choices that have impacts, which is what we need to understand. So where is it practiced? What happens? In fact, it happens all around us all the time. We don't think about it that way sometimes, but the reality is it is, in fact, all around us. It is all kinds of things in all kinds of places. The one thing I will tell you in the time I've been in this work is that today it is more complicated than ever before. All of these things are things that we have to care about, things that we have to talk about in terms of the realities of the issues we face. And I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about them in the future. The size and importance of each one is different for every community. I used to say, matter of factly, when I was a state director, you know, every community is different. And now, after nearly 15 years of working across the country, I've learned one thing: every community is different. So, in fact, that's what it's all about. We have to face community and economic development as a holistic approach. We have to think and talk about each one of these things. They all can bring wealth. They all can create opportunity. But in fact, what we have to do is to clearly have a strategy to help us get there. And then to implement the strategy over time. I remember a community south of Atlanta that we were working in. And in fact, midway through the process, the lady who was at the table on the steering committee raised her hand and said, "Mac, I got a question." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Who's going to do all this work?" Well, guess what? She and everyone else in the community are who's going to do all this work. And then she asked me a bit later, "When will this be over?" And I said, "Ma'am, how long do you plan to live?" Building a great place is a life's work. Therefore, it cannot be about what happens on Tuesday. It has to be very much about how we move forward from here. So why do we do this work? We do it to improve the place we live, to enhance the lives of those people that are around, that are here now, that may come back. It is to facilitate that positive change in status and to challenge that status quo. And yes, it will also, and it is also for this reason right here. This is my grandson. He's the newest one. His name is Finn Majorum. His father is Irish. He came to the United States to play soccer for SMU. He's married to my stepdaughter, Sarah. He has a brother and a sister. Their names are Molly and Aiden. They have dual citizenship, as you can tell. They're Irish and American. Their brother, Sarah's brother, Eric and Sarah Majorum, are their parents. Alec, Sarah's brother, was adopted. We don't know too much about his background. My two daughters, the first one I mentioned to you is named Sarah. She's married to Narendra Ghosh. His parents were both born in India. They are nuclear physicists. We have short conversations. They're lovely people. My other daughter, Jennifer, is gay. Her partner is African American. Her name is Catherine, and she's the Associate Dean of the Law School at the University of Denver. My wife is also a lawyer. My daughter, Sarah, is a lawyer. I am surrounded. Jennifer and Catherine have a daughter named Zoe. She's an African American child. So, in fact, when we get them all together, that extended family, we can have our own. America, you and me. The fact is, it's representative of what is America and what is happening to us across the country as we see things change. Not what we might have expected, 20 or 30 years ago, but what is. And we love them all and care for them all. So, in fact, it is for Finn. This was only 3 weeks ago he was getting his first haircut. Let me tell you now, and this is not a terribly happy part of what I'm going to talk to you about this evening, but we've got to talk about it and deal with it as you face what you're about to undertake. We have an amazing cartoonist at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution named Mike Luckovic. He picks on everybody pretty equally. He is, in fact, a very talented man. Here's one of his cartoons. As you can see, the car is off the cliff. It says, the bottom, "Are we there yet?" is what the people in the car are saying. The sad news of this cartoon is that it ran on November the 4th of 2008. And here we are 3 years later asking the same question. Are we there yet? The reality is the best traveled business writer in America, some believe the best business writer, is Thomas Friedman of the New York Times. He goes everywhere. I got to tell you that, as you may have heard Charles mention, I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. So whenever I hear anything about the king, for those of you not old enough, that's Elvis, I have to read it. I want you to note this column that Friedman wrote called "Elvis Has Left the Mountain." If first it's not apparent to you, it soon will be. There is no magic bullet or for this economic crisis, no bailout, no stimulus. We're going to have to learn to live with a lot more uncertainty for a lot longer than our generation, Mr. Friedman is about my age, than we've ever experienced. This column ran on February the 1st of 2009. Friedman got it right. We have never, in my work life, ever seen anything like we have experienced. So, the question is, how bad was it? Or, if you will, how bad is it in terms of this Great Recession? Which we really haven't duplicated since the long recession of 1873, to be honest about. It has separated itself from everything in our experience. And here's some reasons that show very clearly. This is the last 5 recessions since the 1970s. And what we see is the period of time from when they were at peak employment to when they got back to the same level. This is where we are right now. It is longer, it is deeper, it is broader, it is different than anything that we have seen. The cover of Time magazine on November 24th, 2009 was titled, the section was called "The Decade from Hell," by Andy Swerver of Time, who wrote the section, followed by articles called "The Great Leap Backward" by Michael Toth, "The Decade of Disruption" by Walter Isaacson, "The Lost Decade" by Paul Krugman. Again, all of these different economists thinking and looking about it at different things. So why did they call it that, and what tells us why it's so different? These are the numbers. In the 1980s, we added 18.5 million jobs and 21 million people. In the 90s, we added 21 million people, 21 million jobs, 22 million, and 32 million people. And in the last decade, we added 27 million people and lost 985,000 jobs net. Never in a 10-year period since we have been keeping records as the United States having that loss of jobs. So the reality is it leaves us with a different set of questions. A difficult set of questions, again, that we have never really faced in quite the same way. This recession has been particularly difficult on young people, even those who graduated from college. Nearly half of the class last year does not have a full-time job. The reality is their unemployment rate is time and again, a time and a half higher, at over 17% of the national unemployment rate. The fact is that it's been very different than anything we've seen. The other group that's most affected is those over 55, particularly men who are in construction and in other industries that have been hard hit. What we see, too, is that it is a longer period of uncertainty. What we see is that people have been unemployed for a very long time, almost 50% of them for more than 6 months. Again, something that we have not seen for many, many decades. We think too about the fact that what's happened to us is the loss of net worth of each household in the country. The chart is really quite amazing. When you see this 26% number, look at the other recessions as we go across. 89, 92, there's the dot-com bubble right here, where we lost a little bit of our net worth but gained it back quickly. But what we're talking about now is that the average American family has lost 26% of their net worth, both through the loss of the value of their homes and perhaps the loss of their homes, and in fact, the fact that their 401k is now a 101k or whatever it's like. And those of us my age do know a bit about that. The fact is, it's been widespread and across, and it's led to something that we've not seen before. Today in America, 1 in 5.2 families is on food stamps. The highest number since we reorganized the program in 1977. Really an amazing statistic, which is really hard for us to put our arms around in terms of understanding it. And at the same time, the housing market continues its incredible weakness, both in the loss of values and at the same time, the number of new home sales being severely reduced. What we see amazingly too is that there are jobs out there, but we've got the wrong kinds of folks ready in the wrong places, if you will, to take them. What we're seeing too is more and more jobs require more than a high school diploma. Not necessarily a 4-year degree, but a technical degree and an associate degree. The gap between supply and demand is going to be very interesting to watch. As Lawrence Michel has said, what we have seen is that this is the first cycle where the average family has ended up worse at over time. In spite of substantial growth in productivity, we're not really able to say that everyone is doing better. In fact, they're not. For the very first time, what we see is that the Solid South has the highest unemployment in the country, only matched by our friends in the far west in California and Nevada. But look at that. The reality that many of the go-go states that we all have been from and worked for all have unemployment well above the U.S. average, many of them in double digits, who are really, in fact, continuing to suffer through this recession. What we see, too, is the change in jobs. The only sector of the U.S. economy that has grown consistently over the past 8 years is healthcare. It is the only private sector part of the economy that continues and has continued to grow jobs. What we see is a bit of improvement as we move ahead with minor changes in some of the areas. But note that at the same time, as local and state governments continue to shrink, they take up a lot of what we are gaining. Note, too, that it's been recovery over the last couple of years, but slow in terms of the total numbers of what's possible for us to add. We look, too, at the recent past. This is the last year's figures. And what we see is very, very small growth across most of the South. Georgia actually still going backwards in terms of job growth. North Carolina has increased its job numbers only 0.29% over the last year. In fact, manufacturing has shrunk dramatically. I don't need to tell you that. The reality is that the state of North Carolina added 0.3% in manufacturing jobs, while again, Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas, and other states continue to lose jobs in that sector. When people ask me, well, what is one of the numbers that we need to keep constant look and think about? It is, in fact, per capita income, which is a combination of wages, rents, royalties, and all kinds of earnings that come from investments, and in fact what the government does in terms of retirement, Social Security, and other benefits that are paid. You add all that together, and what we've been working so hard for all these years is to get to parity with the rest of the United States. And you can see that between 90 and 2000, North Carolina made some progress and then lost it all in terms of the progress that we made, and yet not as badly as Georgia, in fact. But the fact is that we've been suffering tremendously, even as compared to the rest of the United States. We monitor many different measures of success and what people are talking about. Here's 4 different indexes that rank North Carolina among chief executives, among the Beacon Hill Institute, among state new economies, and Kaufman's Entrepreneurial Index. Most of them in very solid shape, but some of them in the mid-range. And at the same time, what we see is an increase in those people who are very poor. These are people who make less than 1/2 of what it requires to be out of poverty in the United States. Now, that number for a family of 4 is $21,500 a year. A family of 4. These people, 7.1% of the people in North Carolina earn half of that. So, in fact, it's a kind of poverty which is very different from what we've seen. And yet we still lag behind in our high school education. The state of North Carolina at 84%, a little higher now. But as you can see, we're far behind many of the states across the country that are well over 90% now of their total population over 25 having a high school diploma or more. As we look at bachelor's degrees, knowing that about 30% of the jobs in the economy require a 4-year degree, North Carolina is at 26.5%. Again, one of the things that you have dedicated yourselves to is important, but again, there is a great and long way to go. One of the realities of this metropolitan area, and all of these statistics I'm going to show you now are about the MSA, are about the 2 counties together. This is a look at the percentage of people in North Carolina by MSA that have a college degree. Obviously, the university communities are very high, and sadly, this region is at the very bottom. I'm not suggesting that this by itself is a deafening, if you will, of looking at the future in a way, but it is something you have to concentrate on. It's something you have to do in getting more young people willing to go on and able to go on to 2- and 4-year institutions to be sure that that number changes, because young people want to be around folks that they're comfortable with, that don't look just like me. In fact, the reality is that Sarah is the workforce of the future. I am not. She, in fact, is very well educated. I know, I paid for it. We went on a tour of colleges, and she said to me after we finished the southern tour, "Daddy, I want to go on a northern tour." And I said, "What for?" And she said, "Because I want to." Well, we went to all those schools that you might name, and she ended up going to Wellesley College. She graduated from Wellesley. She joined the AmeriCorps. She spent 2 years serving her country. I happen to believe in national service for everyone. I was very proud of her, and then she said something to me I couldn't believe. She said, "Dad, I want to be a lawyer." I said, "Child, you know we have a 4-year scholarship program. You didn't spend it all your 4 years. I'll help you take the test, and then you're on your own." She took the test. She blew the doors off the test. She went to NYU. She owes NYU $150,000. She's a capital punishment lawyer for those people who have no defense. She makes $36,000 a year. Thank the Lord. NYU has a forgiveness program for public interest law, so they are forgiving her debt every year. She soon will have none. She lives in Durham because she wants to, because she can. As we started this recession, the average worker in America had changed jobs 7 times in their work life and careers 3 times. I had made my quota. But the fact is, young people, the 20-somethings, were changing jobs every 1.1 years. Why? Because they could. And they went where they wanted to go. I often say that Austin, Texas has the best educated waiters in America. Because the kids don't want to leave. The reality is we have to look at where we are and understanding the difficulties of this unemployment situation. Nash with 12.5%, Edgecombe with 15%. noting that it's across North Carolina, not one place or another, not just rural, not just urban, but across the difficulties. The unemployment rates here have been higher than they have been across the state and the nation. I'm not really telling you anything you don't know. What it suggests, however, is that we have to separate ourselves. The reality is that we honor the past, not by trying to copy it, but in fact, by departing from it, by doing something new and something different. Charles mentioned the population changes. In fact, the region did grow slightly more than the U.S. average, a bit less than the state, but we've worked in many places where there has been no growth at all. At the same time, there has been some improvement in terms of the leveling out, and yet this region, in terms of going back to that beginning of 2000, through the year, we've continued to go down in terms of the employment change on the local trend level. It's interesting because what it says is that some of the jobs that you lost were low-paying jobs. And in fact, some of the new ones are a bit better. As you can see, you outpaced North Carolina, and in fact, we're just below the U.S. average in terms of the per capita income changes. So in fact, what does that lead us to in talking about this process? In talking about what you're going to or what you might expect? There's that old saying, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Or maybe, in fact, my favorite, which is, as Yogi Berra said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. That is what this process is all about. It is very much about figuring out what you're going to do and what you're going to commit to. The Consumer Confidence Index is something that we watch all the time, every month, by the Conference Board, because it is not only 70% of the economy, but it tells us how we feel. It's about the present situation and about what people expect in the future. So, in fact, it continues to kind of go down a little bit. It's better than it was, but it's nowhere near where it has been in terms of what's possible there. And if you'd like to have a nervous wreck, just keep watching the stock market, because this is the vitality index that shows what the Standard & Poor's have been doing up and down across many different periods of time. It's interesting, too, that the economists told us that we were out of this at the end of 2009, but as you can see, we're just barely above that zero level of per capita income growth. And I think it's, in fact, true that, as has been said, it's a human recession if it's not a statistical one. The fact is, too, that all the different places across the country and across the world, we're dealing with a different set of problems. These are covers from the middle of 2009 from The Economist and from Newsweek. And as Larry Summers, who was then the National Economic Council director, said, it is, in fact, a statistical recovery, but a human recession. So, in fact, job creation and credit are so important in terms of the possibilities that are there. In fact, Jeffrey Infeld, the CEO of General Electric, in a talk not long ago, said this: this economic crisis does not represent a cycle. It represents a reset. It is an emotional, raw social, economic reset. People who understand that will prosper. Those who don't will be left behind. This vision creation process is your chance to reset. It is your chance to think anew about what you want to be and what you want to do. As you consider this, let me ask you to think about some emerging issues that are really a part of the community and economic landscape that we see across the country. One of my staff found this cartoon a couple of years ago. It's called Cruising with Mr. Status Quo. As you can see, those people gathered on the stern of the ship are looking out the back, and they say, as far as I can see, everything looks just fine, as the ship begins to go down and under. The fact is that we're worried about a number of things. Middle class insecurity. The fact is that our household income is going down, not up. That in fact, as noted, you can see from the chart that this is the only time over the last 40 years that that has been the case. It's a different kind of scenario. Just a few years ago, most of us believed that our 401k and other realities would hold us through our retirement years, but now most people don't think that. Many people are taking care of their parents and will continue to do so as things move forward. What we see too is that a lot of folks, really of all ages, are not really sure that they're going to have enough funds to work comfortably, to live comfortably throughout their retirement years. As you can see, the number who are sure of that continues to go down as people's insecurity goes up in terms of what's there. The cost of college is going up rapidly. As states struggle, as private universities struggle, it's a difficult and national crisis as the United States now ranks 12th among developed countries in the percentage of people who've been to college. The fact is that it is something that we all need to pay attention to and know about. It's also true that many of the homeowners have bigger mortgages than their house is worth. Just look at the statistics from these places. The fact is, the average is that over 35% of the U.S. it has a mortgage which is larger than the value of the house. And as you can see, some of the communities, particularly in Florida and California, are well over 50%. The North Carolina average is at 28%. The Raleigh metro area is at 30% in terms of looking at what's possible here. We also know that, in fact, people are discouraged because of what I mentioned earlier about the time that they've been away from work for so long, and a great deal of concern about the young people who haven't been able to find a job and therefore really have never gotten started on their careers in terms of what's there. We think, too, about the sustainability, and we look at this amazingly large group of people, the baby boomer generation, which is over 75 million. And we know that as we go forward, we can see that there are more and more people who will be over 65 and, in fact, will be living longer and with fewer people, in fact, to support them. So we see the ratio in terms of worker to retirees going down again and again as it has crossed over and as we change and as people do work longer, but in fact live longer as well. So what we see too is that the replacement needs for jobs are going to be huge. And we're going to really, actually, as hard as it is to believe, have a crisis of matching up people to be able to fill those jobs. You can see where they are. There are all kinds of different things, from healthcare to education to food preparation and so forth. These are in the thousands. So, in fact, you can see what's really there. And many of them requiring, as I mentioned, 2- and 4-year degrees. And at the same time, we've moved to a freelance economy. A lot more entrepreneurs. Many more people, in fact, out there on their own. Non-covered workers is what we call them. And looking at the fact and the reality of how this percentage has continued to grow and is very strong. In 2001, 18% of the workers here were in this category. In 2011, in North Carolina, it is 23%. When we do a competitive assessment for a community, we look at 3 things: at people, and place, and prosperity, at what's going on there. So, in fact, I agree with Rich in Florida that it's very much about place. We have to worry and work on our educational capacities and about the structure of our economy, but we also have to work on place. This is a picture of King Street in Charleston, South Carolina. When I moved there, we had a saying: we were too poor to paint and too proud to whitewash. And we kept all those old buildings. This block was completely vacant when I was there in 1979. The fact is that Charleston has rebuilt itself because of place, because of character, because of acceptance of diversity, because of the built environment, and it attracts people of all kinds from all kinds of places. That is happening, in fact, all over the country. And I suggest this is one of the questions that you need to answer. It is inseparable from workforce attraction and retention. What is the uniqueness, the history, the aesthetics, the style of this place? What do you want people to come away with? What are the characteristics that make it different? And obviously, as we sit in this facility, you have built some great things. You have saved some great things. It is very much about putting all of these pieces together to create the kind of community and built environment in this community and across the region that you really want. It is important, too, to understand that diversity is really about a lot of things. It is about connecting the dots of people in place and understanding all of those things. It's interesting that just a couple of months ago, this was the cover of the American Chamber of Commerce Executives magazine, an article that I wrote along with our research director, Ellen Cutter. It is called E Pluribus Unum, which of course is on all of our currencies and everything out of the many one. It has been the slogan of this country from before we were a country. This article was about how diversity is prospering and fostering economic success and how chambers of commerce and economic development organizations across the country are involved in it. From Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to Montgomery, Alabama, to Little Rock, Arkansas, to many, many places featured in this article. Jay Chester, the head of the Little Rock Chamber, said it this way: without having all sectors of the community involved in charting a common strategy, sustainable growth is impossible to achieve. Unity in mission after understanding diverse issues and needs is powerful in creating meaningful change. I suggest that thinking about all of these pieces of diversity is very important. The map of what we see is very different today. The darker blue counties across this country are the ones where the percentage of infants underage are non-white. It is obviously clearly the old black belt of the United States and the Hispanic folks from all over, and yet you see these dots in different places that are quite surprising. The young people view things differently than we do. They come from different places. You can see this chart about what the Pew Research Center found last year, how people are viewing gay marriage or how they're viewing different partnerships and different things. It is not, if you will, to me, right and wrong. It is what is. The fact is that that is what we are and that is what we have. When we think, too, about regionalism, which I would tell you is the bedrock of community and economic development, I never had a person, a businessman or businesswoman, say to me, tell me where the city limits are. They wanted to know about the quality of the region. They wanted to know about the quality of the workforce. This is a chart that talks about cellular telephone activity between counties this past year. One of the things that worries me a little bit about North Carolina is that you're talking to South Carolina. But I'm really worried about the folks in Georgia. They're talking to Alabama. We already knew Texas doesn't talk to anybody but themselves. But the fact of the matter is, it's amazing when you think about it from a regional context. It's interesting, too, that PBS recently released a book called Patchwork Nation. It looked at all 3,000 counties in the United States and divided them up into these 12 categories of different kinds of places, and then put the map together, which is really quite fascinating. This is North Carolina, as you can see, and look at all the different kinds of places there are. This is where you are, right here. You are one of the minority central groups that has a large percentage population of whites, African Americans, which are the two predominant ones in your area, and in many cases, Latino and Hispanic and Asian as well. But it gives us a different picture of the country and understanding how different things can be in very close proximity to each other and what's really there. The geography of job creation as well, as you can see, is more and more in the metropolitan areas. Over 91% of the jobs. Rural America, that is those counties that are not in an MSA, are now 17% of the population. I was at a conference in Washington earlier this year talking about the future of rural America and what is happening to it economically, and it was a very difficult and hard lesson to learn. It's interesting, too, that in the armed forces today, of all the folks who are in service in the armed forces, of all of them, remembering what I said, that 17% of the population is in rural areas, 40% of the Armed Forces of America come from those 17% counties. That's a very different statistic than the Vietnam conflict that I was in. Very different kind of look at what's there. We see, too, all kinds of different places that have done reasonably well through this recession. This is the Milken Index, which is done in the best performing metro areas. Notice that the places who survived are either university cities, state capitals, or military installations nearby. They have weathered this storm better than most. The fact is, they're from one end of the country to the other, some of them quite surprising. What are some of those issues that are going to change what we're doing and how we're doing? One of them is this right here, the opening of the new Panama Canal. There is only one port on the East Coast that currently, under current conditions, will be able to handle these container ships, and it is Norfolk, right down the road. The fact of the matter is it will change shipping around the world because people will now not have to go all the way around the Horn of Africa and so forth. We see automatic parking garages storing cars in ways that I really don't even quite understand. There's one of these being built in Jackson, Mississippi, interestingly enough. The hyper-infrastructure includes a new high-speed, ultra-high-speed computer network being designed by 29 universities currently in this country. UNC Chapel Hill, Wake Forest, NC State, and Duke are all part of GateU, which is going to be an amazing change. We are seeing people reuse underground facilities. This is a completely underground facility in Springfield, Missouri, which has been in operation since 1960. It now includes data storage, food manufacturers, temperature and security controls, served by upground but by below-ground rail coming right into the side of this. The fact is, too, that our states have suffered difficulties, amazing difficulties in terms of the cuts that have come from this recession across the board. 43 states have cut their funding to higher education, including North Carolina. 29 states have cut their funding to the elderly and disabled. 34 states have cut their K-12 education. Most of these things, frankly, I think are in the exact opposite direction of what we need to be doing in terms of being competitive as communities and as states and as a country. And in fact, we see too that higher education is suffering as well. The fact of the matter is that when we think about energy, we've really not changed very much. Look at the chart on the left, which is 1959. And the chart on the right is 2009. The only thing that has changed at all, if you will, is that you see that petroleum has gone down a little bit, and what it's been replaced by is nuclear. That 9% that's there. The rest of it remains virtually the same. There are those that would say that's what comes from not having a policy. That, in fact, we just keep going. But we see many companies and industry groups. It's interesting that from Coors, who now is making a barrel of beer out of half the water that it used to the Coca-Cola company, which is trying to recover over half of all of its plastic bottles, to folks who are doing different things in different ways. In fact, the Toto people in Japan are crushing up the old, if you will, recycling everything they can, discarding toilets. In fact, discarded toilets are being crushed for highway construction projects. We see all kinds of things being done that's really not there, that have not been here before. What we see in this great recession in terms of entrepreneurs is that there are many more of them. They are staying small. They're not growing as much as they were. They're afraid in terms of their expansion plans. And while this chart gives you a slight headache, what it basically says is that most people in small business are really not growing. We know, too, as I mentioned earlier, that healthcare is still growing. It continues to grow far beyond what other industries are doing. And at the same time, what we know is that the ability to pay, the access and affordability is getting further away. As I mentioned, as the population gets older and older, you can see what the growth is going to be between now and 2030 2030 in terms of the age of the population and the sectors that are going to be growing and will need to be taken care of. The growth of it is almost amazing. It was 6% of our household expenses 30 years ago. It's now 16%, and it continues to rise. And those people who, in fact, have premiums, have health care insurance, the premiums continue to go up, and their, if you will, their costs continue to go up, and their affordability goes down. These are tough issues. They're not easy. They're not uniform to you. They're about this whole country and about things that we face. But I suggest that you can plot a future that deals with them and deals with what you can, in fact, control. I think it's important for you to understand them and be proactive about them, whether it's Austin or Martinsville, Virginia, or Nashville, or any place that we work. This work is a life's work. It is very much about giving. You all came here this evening because you care about this place. I suggest that Winston Churchill had it right. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. Every day, think about this place and what you can do and how you can participate in this process and make it happen for your children and for your grandchildren. Albert Einstein gave us many things. And one of the things that folks don't really think too much about is some of these wonderful one-liners, and I want to share two of those with you. Here's the first one. We can't solve problems by using the same thinking that we used to create them. And the second one is my favorite definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. In my career, I've been fortunate to have staffs of 300 to 350. I have, everywhere I've been, asked them never to say two things to me. And here they are. This is the first one. And here's the second one. Well, maybe we can get it right this time. I suggest to you, as you move in this process, don't you say these two things. They're not going to help you. This is about the future, not the past. It's about what we can do. It's about knowing that we have change as our friend and change as opportunity. Last September, I had the opportunity to be with Colin Powell. He came into this reception where I was and walked up to me, and here's the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and former Secretary of State, of course, and asked me about my naval service. You may not believe this, but I was speechless. I really didn't know what to say, and I finally got a few things out. He's a gracious man. I've subsequently read his biography and read several of his books. One of his books is called Leadership, and I want to close with this thought from him. It's called Confront the Brutal Facts. If it ain't broke, don't fix it is a slogan for the complacent, the arrogant, or the scared. It's an excuse for inaction, a call to non-arms. It's a mindset that assumes or hopes that today's realities will continue in a tidy, linear, and predictable fashion. Pure fantasy. The Secretary's right. We have to change. We have to do it now. We have to do it forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. I know you all came here tonight to find out a visioning process, but this may not be the greatest news in the world, but it is what it is, and that's what we've got to deal with today is the reality and the times that we're living in. So we appreciate Matt being here. I was just going to open up, if anybody had any questions for Matt at this point in time, we're glad to take them. Just a couple before we call on Sue Perry Cole to wrap us up. Any questions for Matt at this time? Okay, Sue Perry? Yeah.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm going to put you at ease right away. I'm the only one up here in these pointy-toed heels. So believe me, I've reached my limit. I will not be long. name is Susan Perry Cole, and I've been a resident of the city, Rocky Mount, and Edgecombe County for nearly 32 years. I'm also one of 3 co-chairs serving on the Community Partners Coalition that is working with the consultant team whom you've met tonight, leading the visioning process. I've been asked to make a few comments, and I will be very brief. First of all, I want to offer this observation, and really I'm echoing a remark made earlier today by one of my fellow co-chairs. Tonight, as I look out into this fabulous audience, which consists of a broad cross-section of residents from many different segments of our communities, I can attest to the fact that in my 3 decades of residence here, I have never before witnessed the coming together of the 3 governmental units and you all, and the citizens around a common purpose. And that purpose is the common good and improving the future economic well-being of our entire region. Give yourselves a hand. Now, research tells us that economic recovery will require communities like ours to work across political and geographic boundaries. We must also change our collective negative mindset and the profoundly negative media coverage that we have managed to attract that continues to further damage our already vulnerable social fabric. But what a visioning. I asked myself this question when I woke up about 2 a.m. this morning and was thinking about what I wanted to share with you tonight. And here's what I found on the internet. First of all, God's word. Where there is no vision, the people perish. And I want to credit my pastor, Thomas L. Walker, and the Ebenezer Church family for teaching me this lesson very early on in my coming to this community. Another quote, big thinking precedes great achievement. That's from Williford Patterson. Jonathan Swift put it this way, vision is the art of seeing the invisible. And I like this quote from Ralph Lauren. Of course, I like Ralph Lauren. A leader has the vision and conviction that a dream can be achieved. He inspires the power and the energy to get it done. This is a quote from a book called Visionary Leadership. There is no more powerful engine driving an organization, and I want to say community, toward excellence and long-range success than an attractive, worthwhile, achievable vision for the future, widely shared. And here's one that I really think we all should write down. Vision without execution is hallucination. That's by Thomas Edison. Henry Kissinger put it this way, leaders must invoke an alchemy of great vision. And I'll close with this thought. Many years ago, a very close friend of mine, Joyce Dickens, shared with me a book by Norman Vincent Peale called The Power of Positive Thinking. And I want to offer this to you tonight from Norman Vincent Peale. No matter how dark things may be, no matter how dark things may seem or actually are, raise your sights, and see the possibilities. Always see them, for they are always there. Good night, and God bless everyone. Thank you.
We want to thank you for coming tonight. As you leave, if you've got the cards out there, if you've got other people that you know that might want to be a part of this process, please take them with you and leave your cards so we'll know how to get in touch with you. Thank you all for being here tonight and sharing your time with us. Thank you.
Yes, we do.